you're gonna hear cats.
Yeah, I've just seen one. Yeah, yeah,
This is the cat studio.
yeah.
William, it's good to see you. Welcome back to the Risky Scientists.
Good to be here. Thank you, Bruce. Cheers.
All right, well, it's been too long, William. It's been years since we spoke publicly, and I want to hear first of all what's changed with the SDP? What's its status, its size, its ambitions, its strategy? Yeah, give us an update.
Well, since we last spoke, we've won a few elections in the city of Leeds and Leeds City Council. So we've got three councillors there, and we're going to contest some more in May next year. So hoping to increase the size of the group. Obviously, we've had a general election, and the number of candidates we had in 2019 was 20. And last year we got 122 people across the nominated, so that was good. And that meant that actually 20% of the public couldn't vote without seeing us on the ballot paper. So that was decent. Since last speaking to you, we did a small but significant electoral pact with Reform UK. It was very small. It was 24 seats nationally. We had 6 seats each, which we had a free run on, and then we did South Yorkshire together, split it 7-7. Um, that was we did the deal when Reform were quite a little bit in the doldrums, to be honest. And Nigel Farage became leader of Reform again a few weeks before the election. I think the electoral pact just held on, actually. I think if he'd been a bit earlier, he might have put it in the bin. But it was progress for us, and the party's growing steadily. We could do with a good funder. I think that would help us a great deal. And we just look forward to the next challenges. We're excited about the Holyrood elections to Scottish Parliament next year. We have a very good candidate in the Glasgow division. Hope that he can get across, Craig Houston. So, yeah, we just continue on, Bruce.
You do, and you've got the local elections in May of next year.
Hmm.
Before we talk about your ambition for local elections, what is there any way for you to rank SDP's scale in relation to other parties in terms of council seats contested or council seats held, something like that?
We're still very small, Bruce. I mean, when I took over as leader in 2018, the party was massive. For those that don't know, it was massive in the 80s, millions of votes, and in British political history, it's the biggest challenge to the two-party system we've ever had. That may change at the next election with reform, but to date, that is the biggest one we've had in the 80s. But it got very small. It got tiny. Literally probably 80 or 100 members. So we're in the low thousands now. We've got a few thousand members, and we've got branches all over the country. But it's growing steadily. All you can do is, I mean, the moment it isn't growing, Bruce, I'd be concerned. But we do grow. It is. I have to say, it's very difficult presently with reform sucking oxygen out of the room. Most British people, a lot of people are looking at reform as a sort of cudgel. They're not too fussed. If you speak to people in the pubs, they're not too fussed about what the detail is. They really despise and despair of the two parties that have misgoverned our country. So they're using reform as a sort of battering ram. And we are a little bit different. We produce detailed policy and think very carefully about policy. And we've just issued a new energy green paper, Energy Abundance. I don't think reform could do a bit of work like that, but it's been not well received by the experts and some of our friends in the media. So we're a little bit different to reform, but you have to be yourself. I think there's no good us trying to copy that.
Yeah, well, I do want to make some comparisons with reform. You've got a media sort of problem here. I don't want to say problem, but you characterize it how you want. But the media isn't reporting SDP. SDP is having success. It does have, and like you say, an electoral pact with reform. What's the media's problem?
Well, we get on media that sympathise with us and are willing to take our message. So I'm on talk radio a lot, talk TV a lot. It can't be many, well, no months go by when I'm not on a few times. Henry Bolton, our defence expert, is on both Talk TV and GB News a lot, usually weekly. So they're on, but I agree with you. There's been a problem with mainstream broadcast media I think, honestly, since I became leader in 2018, I've been on the BBC 5 times, something like that. They just don't, they're not interested. And even during the election campaign, when we had these candidates, and I think we were the sixth biggest slate in the country, probably, couldn't get on Question Time, couldn't get anywhere. The only, I mean, I got on Politics Live, and the BBC, bless them, covered our national manifesto launch. So we were on the 9 o'clock news, and friends that hadn't seen me for years called me and said, "What are you doing on the news?" You know, so that was good, but it's very limited, Bruce. They generally don't approve of us, and we say things that they don't like, frankly. So that's the way it is. It's very polarized. I don't think many people watching your channel would be surprised to conclude that broadcast media is just propaganda. A lot of it's just propaganda and politically biased, I'm afraid. The coverage bias that you get on these channels is astonishing.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So let's make this comparison with Reform. So Reform is getting a lot of media attention for saying similar things to SDP, and like
Hmm.
you say, it's sucking the oxygen out of the room. You know, how are you gonna how are you gonna change that? I mean, I don't know. You tell me
I'll tell.
if it.
Well, I
Yeah,
yeah, I think the mistaken comparison is to say, and people do say this, and it's fine. I don't blame people for saying this, but when we sort of started it up again, people said, "Well, Reform has got all this, and they've only been Brexit Party, stroke Reform have only been in business a couple of years." That is actually untrue, really. Reform is the latest iteration of Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage has been at it for a quarter of a century. And, you know, I always go back to the Eastleigh by-election. Have a look. There's a little lad called N Farage who got a few hundred votes. So unless you go through this period of lost deposits and electoral humiliation, you can't grow bigger. I mean, you literally can't. And I would argue it's never been done in less than 20 years. I'm hoping this time we can do it more quickly. But the fact is, in British electoral history, it's been done, political history, it's been done 4 times. Labour Party committee in 1902 took 20 years, but they had two big advantages. They had the franchise expanded, and they had a working class population wasn't represented. And then you get the post-war Liberals, similar. Joe Grimmond took about sort of 15, Stewart and Grimmond took about 20 years to make it a national party. Coventry Party, which is now Green Party, 20 years. UKIP, about 20 years. So I'm afraid the people that want the SDP to suddenly start winning elections, we joke internally. I mean, Rod Liddle, I mean, I was on the phone to Rod this morning, and we always sign off our conversations by prepare for government, you know. Um, I'm afraid it is a bit of mirth, but I'm very realistic. This period is very critical for us because if we're unable to get from 120 candidates to something like 300 and get into the hundreds of thousands of votes, then we're not on the flight path. We're not on the right path to make it. And so I'm concerned about it. I think we could do with some funding, but the message also, Bruce, the other thing is the message is different to Reform. The people that know the political compass, we're top left. I mean, crudely, we're sort of left authoritarian British Gaullists. The Reform are Thatcherite free traders, really. I think they have a major conflict in the party dealing with that now because I think Trump and Vance are right, frankly, on trade protectionism and reindustrialization and national citizen preference. So there's a tension there. But that I mean, in a way, it's not my problem. I mean, that they are in a different space, and all I can do is bat and argue for my own points.
yeah. But I mean, just on the Thatcherism, I think Reform is conflicted. Like you say, it's conflicted on the Thatcherism. So when Richard Tice was leader, and I did interview him, is very Thatcherite. Nigel Farage comes back, and it sort of gets contradictory, and it sort of gets steals some of your
Yeah.
policies, right? So
And the
Reform
slogan.
is
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Slogan.
I mean,
Just lifted. Yeah.
it's at least incoherent. Economically, it is incoherent, and I don't know where it's going. Richard Tice is very quiet under Nigel Farage. So I mean, reform's not helping you right now. I mean, what is your relationship with reform?
Well, Richard was decent to me. I when Patrick F. Flynn, and we lost Patrick sadly this year, but when Patrick F. Flynn and I started the negotiation, I said, "Do you want to do it?" And one of the reasons Richard agreed to it is that A, people were on his back saying you need to cooperate with people, and B, we're the only ones that he could trust because he said, I mean, it was considered that the smaller parties just were not really coherent or sensible enough. So, and he honoured the pact, and also he was very grown up about it. And I said, look, I'll do the deal. It's an electoral pact only, but we're not changing any of our economics, and we'll still argue for railways, water, power distribution, production, and some housing to be, public sector. Is that okay? And he said, yeah, fine. You back for your own side. And so he's very grown up about it, and he was fine. I don't know Nigel as well. I've only met him a few times. I don't really have a relationship with him, but I think no, relations are fine. I mean, I don't, a lot of the team you get to know, right? The team's changed a little bit in Reform headquarters, but they've got to do their own thing. I think to the people that are interested in detail, they know that there is a tension. It's an incoherence. It's more than a tension. It's incoherent. You cannot, in my view, pretend you're a social conservative with free trade libertarian policies. It literally doesn't work. Sorry. JD
Yeah.
Vance. Some of the Americans are about 20 years ahead of the British on this. Some of them, when Trump started his tariffs, I wouldn't do the tariffs in the way he's done them, but I was about the only British politician that would argue for them. And the Spectator, when they wanted to do a piece on it, interviewed me because no one else would back them. So I don't know.
Yeah, so just so you know on tariffs, I just interviewed Ben Habib of Advance UK, and
Yeah.
he had made when he launched the party, he was a big fan of Trump's tariffs. So when I interviewed him, I said, clarify that. And he's like, it's a trade-off, right? You can balance protectionism with leveraging tariffs to get other other things, non-economic non-economic things,
Hmm.
such as security. So
Hmm.
he's is that how you see tariffs?
No, I'm much more Benite really on it. I know Ben, and Ben's a friend, and but Ben's changed his position as Richard has. Richard argues for nationalisation of steel now, because if you don't do that, you lose all of the steel industry. I mean, Lynn and one or two other journalists say it doesn't matter, let it go. But you're strategically very foolish. You become some sort of crippled vassal state if that happens. In security terms, it's just madness. There's a reason why Forge Masters in Sheffield is part of the military, effectively. It has to be. So Ben, I think they are. I think a lot of them are sort of events are pushing them to this position, whereas my position's much more. It's much more profound, really. I think philosophically, I think global free trade uh, is a highly utopian idea. It disregards politics to such a degree, who gets what, that it could never work. I don't think you could pretend to have it, but if you look at the history of trade protectionism, the dominant industrial economies always wanted. Britain wanted it when it dominated. The United States wanted it when it dominated, but it's not in the interests of developing countries. And Britain industrially is a developing country. Britain now is 9% manufacturing, and a lot of that's food, which is very heavy. I mean, it's really losing out drastically. So, if you want to address the balance of payment deficit and the chronic beggary of the country, you have to face the fact that open free trade with China is just going to kill you, basically. And that, sorry, you can be an ideologue if you like. You can read Hayek and say, oh, that's what we want, but that's not in the country's interests. I'm interested in what's good for the country. So that's my position. A bit different to theirs.
Yeah. So just on quickly on nationalization, it's often occurred to me, I've actually written about this, that defense is the sector that is most has the best argument for nationalization because it increasingly it's very small volume production. It's uncompetitive. Even when you make it competitive,
Mm.
you get a trend towards monopolization. So the companies just acquire each other until you get a monopoly. And if it's a monopoly, you might as well own it from the government's
Yes.
perspective. So how does defense fit into your nationalization plan?
I think you describe it very well. I mean, the philosophically, the real case that the SDP makes, which is in the published stuff we produce, New Declaration, End of Indifference, is the classical economic argument that say the best example is water, but power distribution, production distribution is similar, particularly distribution, in that these are natural monopolies, and it's just you're pretending. You've got a pretendy privatization if you privatize a natural monopoly like Thames Water, and then you allow it to fall into foreign hands, which I think is a cultural problem. I spoke at the Tory conference as a guest on Monday to a decent fringe meeting, and I made the case. I'm not rude because I've got many friends in the Tory party, and I used to be a member 20 years ago briefly, but I made the point, the SDP point is that, we believe if brute force sometimes has to be used, and if brute force isn't working, you're not using enough. And things like, why would you want the water supply in your capital to be sold to a foreign entity? It's if you think that's right, I think you've got a cultural problem. I think you're some sort of cultural decay going on there. And then they use it as debt mules, and it just becomes
Yeah,
insolvent.
yeah.
And
Or
incentives are
right.
different. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we know this, right? We know it. I mean, if you're a private water company, you sweat the assets and you ship the profits out. If you're a public water company, you just might be a bit boring. You just do some engineering and supply water. That's it. It's different. In defense, yeah, I agree with you. It is. I mean, things like munitions, even shells. Because the West has shipped large quantities to Ukraine, and you realize that the production that we have in the UK in South Shields and other places is very slow and very small scale. But you make a perfect point. I mean, you may as well, for all you look at the MOD's procurement disasters, you may as well simplify the whole thing and just produce it directly. And there was that argument actually in during COVID that the NHS on protective clothing and a lot of other stuff that you might need in a pandemic, you may as well produce it yourself. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a security argument for onshoring, as it's generally called in America. Even if it's more expensive to produce at home, it's a secure supply if we have another breakdown of the global supply chain, like we did in 2020. But yeah,
Right.
totally agree.
I,
So
it's the difference in cost and value. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. All right. So, William, I'm trying to race through some things here because I know your time is precious, and there's so much interesting stuff going on with SDP. Let me just clarify your potential prospects with reform. Like, would you be open to another electoral pact with reform?
Sure, I would, but I don't think they would with us. I think I would always say that because I'm an 80% electoral reform supporter. 20% of me understands the value of the first past the post system, and it's not really a system, it's just 650 constituencies and you make up your own mind. But I think the one of the principal, apart from the obvious thing that we're misgoverned by the two rotten parties, and it's like a cartel. It stops new entrants, and it stops even things like a Conservative Party existing. I mean, point Peter Hitchens makes quite rightly, although he's a constitutional conservative, is that there are conservatives, right? So there should be a Conservative Party. Well, in Britain there isn't. There can't be. So, I think it's worth changing the system so you open it up. And the other point is that um, Brexit proved that the Parliament doesn't look like the British public at all. I mean, it doesn't represent it at all. It's gate-kept by the selection processes of the duopoly, and you end up getting highly selective, you get a Parliament full of Liberal Democrats, basically. And that's a problem. So for all those reasons, I'm in favour of electoral reform. And because of that reason, I'm in favour of doing deals, electoral pacts. I'm not in favour of anyone controlling our manifesto because I think it's different. But I would always do an electoral pact, and I would speak to Richard again and Nigel. But I don't think Nigel is. I'm a little bit worried, Bruce, that Nigel, if he wins the election outright, and there's a lot of time between now and the next election, but if he does, he'll lose his appetite for electoral reform. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. That's the historical pattern, certainly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we were talking earlier about policies, SDB policies. Now, the last time we spoke, I wrote an article where uh, it was it was titled with the question, "Has STP hit the sweet spot, something like
Mm,
that. And I was getting to the idea that you were combining the social conservatism with the
mm,
with economic nationalism,
mm.
and then reform sort of stole some of that thunder. So reformers try to hit that same sweet spot. The Conservative Party tried to hit that sweet spot, particularly going after votes in the Red Wall.
Yeah.
So do you see the current government, or the Overton window, not just the current government, but the mainstream parties? Do you see mainstream parties stealing your policies right now in the, let's say, the last year or so?
Yeah, they have. So in the last year, first, just before the election, Reform stole our strapline, which is family, community, nation. They changed the nation to country. Very well, I won't say what I think about it, but they, it was obvious that they just nicked it. Now, and then other things happen. I mean, yeah, calling for nationalisation of steel or nationalisation of the railways, which is happening anyway because the franchises are failing, the system's chaotic. Obvious. Thames Water, Richard Tice has argued, could be in national ownership because it's a basket case. So all of these things happen, and most recently, we've published this wonderful bit of work on energy abundance. Check it out on stp.org. It's on there. A proper 60-page report on diagnosing what caused the energy crisis, and then advocating some solutions. Now, it's amazing. We're a small party, but in the last 6 weeks, everyone starts using the term energy abundance. The Tories use it, journalists use it, some think tanks use it, and it just spreads like wildflower. ARC, the responsible conservative group have used it as well. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. So it spreads, and there's not a lot I can do about it. I'm a realist. People say, does it annoy you? Well, in a way it does, and it does in a way it doesn't, because I want, for the good of the country, I want people to read this stuff and say, actually, they happen to be right. You need some nuclear power, and you need some base load. You need it quite quickly if you're going to save your industry. So it's just the way of life. My deepest fear is not a fear. I think it happens. It will happen. Is I'll be knocking on the door of a voter in Leeds, and I'll say, family, community, nation, or energy abundance, and they say, "Oh, it sounds like reform." I think, okay, right, yeah, sure, yeah. Not a lot I can do, but at least I would say, at least we believe in it.
Yeah, yeah. Right. That's an interesting point. Yeah. So look, I got a final question about politics, or SDP's politics, and then we're going to riff on the state of the country. And that
Yeah.
is, you mentioned earlier the joke that SDP should prepare for government. But hang on, maybe it's not a joke, right? Because these are pretty unprecedented times. I've said in public that British politics is in a state we haven't seen in 100 years, because we have the prospect. Well, one of the reasons I say that is we have the prospect of a new party taking control of government, which hasn't
Mm,
happened since Labour formed their first administration in the 1920s. So on that
mm,
basis, we're into unprecedented territory in a span of 100 years. And there are other reasons. I mean, we've got people talking about civil war. We've got ethnic tensions that are unprecedented. There's lots of reasons to think these are strange times. So wait a minute. What if reform doesn't win an outright majority? What if there are all sorts of new parties, including Advance UK, which is winning seats in Parliament, and including STP winning
mm.
seats in Parliament? Could you not be a part of a coalition government even before there's electoral reform and you get first past the post is kicked out and we get proportional representation?
It's outside West Yorkshire. It's very difficult to see us at the moment. I don't want it to be like this. I'm just being honest, right? I think you should be honest. Outside of West Yorkshire, I can't see seats that we would win under first past the post. I think if we win more divisions, more wards in South Leeds, then I think we'll be very competitive next time in Leeds Central. So I think we were pretty good last time, but I think we can do it. But it's very, very difficult. But to get real momentum, I spoke to Danny Kruger, the Tory MP that left and went to Reform. I was quite surprised. He's a thoughtful fellow. I know him. I've known him for some time. He had a lot of sympathy for us as a political platform. And I think if there was a viable route, actually, I think we could have got him, but there wasn't a viable route to get him elected. I mean, I spoke to him about it. So that's the issue. I think what if you get electoral reform, then all bets are off. Then our coalition can actually assemble and can convene and get representation in Parliament, and you could elect people and keep them. So I think that's the big hurdle. I'm very. You have to be realistic. There's no point in saying, we can have 300 candidates and we're going to get 50 MPs. The Green Party have been at it for years and years and years, and they've done very well. But their target for the next election is 30, and they're massively bigger than us. So I think I'm looking at the constituents really. I think the SDB needs a better, stronger media team in London, and we need some funding in the next year to promote the message better and to grow the party. I have high hopes for particular reasons in Holyrood. I think we can take a seat there and get someone in the Parliament, which would be a big step forward for us.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't mean to question your analysis here, William. I'm just trying to think ambitiously. I'm trying to push the envelope of what could happen here. So there's two things I can think of. Could you not, your good self, could you not stand as a candidate for Parliament in Leeds
Mm.
at a time of tumult? Imagine some scenario where reform is facing its own scandal. There are scandals in reform, financial, etc. We don't need to get into that. But just imagine that reform is curbed by something. You have a local base in Leeds. Could you not stand in Leeds?
I could. I did in 2019, and we got because it was such a squeezed election. I got a few hundred votes, and then last time we got 2,000 or so. So the rate of progress is really quite substantial. And yes, you could do that, but I'm just being realistic that we have a first past the post system, and all smaller parties can do is get concentrated in a particular area. It's Leeds for us. It was Brighton for the Greens. You have to do that, otherwise you have no chance at all. I do agree with you that the country's in a serious state, and I think all bets are off because of that. I mean, all political history, there were particular reasons why the Labour Party replaced the Liberals. In the Anglosphere, two-party systems are extremely persistent, and there's obviously something cultural going on there because Britain, Ireland, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand basically have them. And the duopoly system. I'm aware of what happened in Canada, but it's extremely difficult to break down. But I think we are in a really perilous position on all fronts, social, economic, and so on. So I think almost anything could happen. So certainly long term, I'm very optimistic.
Yeah. Well, just to make you more optimistic, William, I'll tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I taught at a university. So I'm not no longer full time in academia, but I still teach by invitation. And I was teaching on British politics, and I said, look, there's a possibility here that both both parties of the duopoly, Labour and Conservative, the two-party system, both of them are kicked out of the two-party system. They're both so discredited by the time of 2029 or whenever it happens that they come third, fourth, maybe fifth, sixth, right? Like the
Yeah.
Conservatives are on track to be kicked that low down, and Labour is not helping itself. It could be kicked out of the two-party system. So then you've got new parties, and people
Mm,
start thinking, SDP is a new party.
mm,
Why don't
mm.
I take it more seriously? You don't have to respond to that, but it's one of the things I'm thinking about.
No, I agree with you. I think that there is a lot to that, and I mean, it's impudent for me to ask you a question because you're the interviewer. But which do you think of the duopoly is more vulnerable now today, Labour or Conservative?
Well, given we are speaking, just to be clear to the audience, we are speaking in the week of the Conservative Party conference, and Kemi Badenoch has had a good conference. I do not think she's going to survive another year. I don't think it's been good enough for her to consolidate her position as leader. So I still think the Conservative Party is the one that's going to be is going to suffer worse than Labour. But Labour
Mm,
is certainly going to suffer. And I and
mm.
I'm taking seriously the prospect of Labour being kicked out of the two-party system.
I slightly disagree. I think Labour is a more perilous position today. I think the Tories have been kicked, and they are down at 17% or 20%, whatever, so they've been kicked. Morale was actually quite good at the Tory conference. There's nothing on it now. They have no responsibility. They're just
It's true.
rebuilding. And it was, they understand that, and history says they recover actually. But I acknowledge we're in a slightly different position now. But I think Labour's in a worse position because they're in government, and there's time for people just to slowly forget the Tory debacle. But every single thing that happens, budget-wise, immigration-wise, chaos, two-tier justice, the rest of it, Labour will get the blame. So it's scary. I mean, to be that low down and 4 years to go, horrifically bad for the Labour Party, I think, anyway. I think they
Yeah,
have.
well, I,
Yeah.
I agree with you. So we're having a discussion about this, so which I wanted to get to anyway, rather than an
Mm,
interview. So this is where we should get into this. So I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is, you're right that the Labour Party is discrediting itself in government.
mm,
However, Reform UK has sucked mostly Conservative votes. It does suck a lot of Labour votes too, and
mm,
as the Starmer administration fails, it's going to suck more of those Labour uh, votes. But
mm,
the Conservative vote is getting split more than the left vote. Now, we do have this new party, your party, right?
mm,
But it is so chaotic. I don't think it is splitting the vote on the left, but I can't see it stealing as much votes as Reform, Advance UK will steal from the right. So I think the Conservative Party, even though it's out of government, you're quite right, it's out of government. It's facing more challengers, competitors for its base. And the other thing I'll mention is, you were saying, the Labour Party is getting discredited more by things like freedom of speech. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party gets tied into that, right? Because there's the legacy, like the Online Safety Act is a Conservative administration's act.
mm,
So the dissatisfaction is with the duopoly. It's not
mm,
just with the current government, although I appreciate that British politics is truly about kicking out the last government rather than voting in the next government. So
mm,
Labour is going to suffer. Labour's going to suffer in 2029 or whenever it happens. By the way, I just wrote an article where I think Keir Starmer should resign now because of this
mm.
scandal over the spy
Yeah,
the spy case being dropped.
yeah.
So he could be gone this year if Parliament does its due diligence and journalists do their due diligence and pursue that case, like that story. I should call it a story.
Mm, mm,
Starmer should be gone. That's what I've just substacked about. So
mm.
and then what, we get an election in 2026 rather than 2029. I mean, these are
I don't,
wild times.
yeah, there are wild times. On that, I don't. I think he should go, but I think we've had a shift in how politics is done. So there's no decency, there's no responsibility anymore. So they'll just tough it out, and they don't care. I think he could well go next year for other reasons. I mean, the biggest one is just a catastrophic May elections. They'll lose Scotland and Wales. I mean, probably to reform. So that's extremely serious for them. And so internally, I think the Labour Party will probably depose him. I don't buy that the Labour Party won't last the full 5 years. They will. They will. There's no there's no reason for them to. MP, I know I've had enough cups of tea and beers in the Commons with them. MPs will not just volunteer their seats and say, "Oh, actually, I want to give up." I mean, I drank a lot of tea and beer with Tories at the end game who were frankly saying, "Oh, we just want it to end. It's just awful." I can see that, but they don't. They want another 6 months' salary or whatever. So there's no with 100. Labour has a majority. I know they only got 34%, but Labour has a 170 seat majority, which is the biggest since 1820, I think. So it's not happening. They as a government, they will get right the way through, which is why I'm sticking to my idea that they are in serious. Lord knows what who will vote Labour in 4 years' time.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
actually scary. Whereas, just to get back to the Tories, again, drinking with them, they made a very good point to me, some of my friends in the Tory party on Monday, that if you line up Badenoch and Jenrick, you have probably as good a two front leaders as any political party in the country, probably. It's, he can have different views, but you cover your bases. Badenoch does have the advantage of not backing down and not being bullied by BBC interviewers. She gave a good speech. Paddy O'Flynn and Rod and I have always quite liked her. She was being decent to me. And although, she's not perfect, and Jenrick is the harder side, and he's getting a lot of plaudits for his reactions to, cultural stuff and immigration. So I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to the country.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I'm just gonna close that out though. I mean, you can come back at me actually if you want, but I mean, I think I actually don't disagree with you that Labour it, probably we have to do this as estimates.
Mm.
Probably Labour's going to get to 2029, but I just want to clarify for the audience there are mechanisms to bring that government down, even if the Labour MPs want to go to 2029. So imagine a fiscal collapse.
Mm.
It's going to happen on current trends
Yes.
at some point, and some
Yeah.
people are saying it's going to happen within years, which could be before 2029. Nigel Farage himself has said, I could be prime minister in 2027. One of the reasons he said that is because of fiscal collapse. If the bond markets withdraw, stop buying government debt, there's fiscal collapse. And then you could have a vote of no confidence. Parliament could force an election. Even the king could force an election, for that matter. So there are mechanisms, just so the audience knows, that could bring an election before 2029. And
Mm.
this is a particularly. I mean, I'm just going to speak for myself. We should talk about this. This is a particularly incompetent, ideologically blinkered, myopic administration. I mean, just
Yes.
irrespective of the party that we've
Yes.
had, that conservative administrations have been myopic, blinkered, incompetent, but this one, surely it's off the charts. I mean, you tell me whatever you want to respond to there.
No, well, no, you're quite right. So just on the question of the mechanisms, I don't. If you got a 170 seat majority, the mechanisms of no confidence in Parliament shouldn't be a problem. And again, you've got Lib Lab Pact in the late 70s. You've got two elections in 1974, but these were wafer thin little majorities. I'm saying it. I bet they, even in a crisis, even a bond crisis, because the reaction to a bond crisis is brutal cuts to public expenditure. We spend vastly too much on welfare. We spend vastly too much on civil service. The civil service is bigger than it's ever been. So I don't buy that there isn't scope to adjust. There is, and if so there's lots of detail there. But that's what would happen. It would be brutal, and there'd be lots of gnashing of teeth and crying. But I don't buy that the Labour MPs sack their own government. I just don't buy that. On the sort of broad question, the best way of looking at this government and its ideology and the crazy ideas they have is that Aris Roussinos wrote quite a good piece recently for Unheard on this. It's rather like the last bastion of sort of progressive liberal thinking, and the whole reality, the sea is rushing in now, so the reality is rushing in, but these people can't deal with reality. I mean, the biggest problem with Starmer is that his belief systems are not really reality based. I mean, he and the people that govern alongside him think reality is far right. They think the public's views on normal things like having a border or restricting immigration or national citizen preference or any of these things are far right. So they're totally hampered. I mean, it's there's no hope for these people. I think and it's dangerous because if you govern with nostrums that are so disconnected, to have such a low correspondence to reality, obviously you're going to struggle, and they're struggling like hell. And we're waiting for a paradigm shift that's imposed by crisis or an election. Probably I agree with you. A crisis could happen first, and you'll get some sort of reaction. But everything they believed in, Bruce, is wrong. So it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk quickly about cuts, right? So you just mentioned cuts, and this week, Chris Philps, the Conservative shadow uh, chancellor, has announced $47 billion of savings if the Conservatives led the government. And I stacked on this immediately. I said, look, that is, yeah, I said, big deal, big deal. That the government is borrowing 150 billion, more than that, a year
Mm,
currently. And most of that is interest on debt. It's completely
mm,
unsustainable.
mm.
47 billion. And by the way, the Conservatives then said, half of what we save, we're going to spend on other things, right? So you're not really saving anything. So big deal. So what's the SDP's position on cutting government spending?
Um, You'd have to take it category by category, but the broad position is that I speak about debt a lot. The Economics Green Paper, The End of Indifference, the first line of the preface is that debt-based consumption is not prosperity. And that's what I'm afraid that's what the United States and Britain has been into for a long, long time. And
And
eventually,
France. And
and
France,
France.
right?
Well, France, yeah, I mean, it's 1972, isn't it? Pompidou ran a surplus.
Yeah.
So it's chaotic. I mean, they're just beyond. I don't know what they have a particular problem, but so let's take it sector by sector. I mean, the biggest one is welfare. The welfare budget just increases and increases and increases, and there are some categories of it where citizens are getting, say, personal independence payments for mobility, and some of these successful claimants are in their 20s, and they're getting given BMWs on lease and Audis to get around. Some of them because they're depressed. Those are the edge cases. But obviously some are probably justified. But there are edge cases that are just ostentatiously wrong. I mean, not just wrong, but badly wrong. And we just can't afford this. And the system that coughs that up is a system that just isn't working. Sorry, too many people in their 20s out of work for anxiety, and I don't believe that that's friendly. I think if you're anxious, you should be encouraged to turn up as a condition of getting anything from the state, at least a day of work, and that would improve your anxiety because you meet people and you'd be in a better position. And I also say, I've said this before, I'm not a believer, but I do attend church, is that I don't believe the state can solve the anxiety crisis that we have. I think to turn up, go to church and do a bit of singing, and that might improve. And it's free, by the way. In previous generations of people would, if they have a spiritual problem, which is partly this, would have gone to a cleric. So yeah, I mean, there's lots you have to do, I'm afraid, on welfare, and it sounds very brutal, but you have to do this. And the government tried to cut welfare modestly in the summer, and the backbenchers who are innumerate and childish rebelled against it, and they couldn't do it. So that's welfare. On housing, housing's an interesting one because I think about it a lot, and my background is in town planning and surveying, and I've built a few houses. So we spend 36 billion. We'll spend 36 billion on housing benefit this year. Housing benefit, for those that don't know, is paying rents. It's the state helping you to pay your rent to private or public. Um, and we spend about 12 billion building houses. That should be the other way around. In the long run, savings equals investment equals future prosperity. And unless you can turn this round and start investing in houses and deal with the supply side, you'll need to spend a lot of money on rent. Obviously, it's supply and demand. So that's an example. The immigration chaos is another example. We spend about 8 billion housing illegal migrants. These are people that have unarmed invasion basically to the country. Again, any normal citizen looking at this, if you were say in Kent, a lot of people have just arrived, rock up at Kent. We're dealing with tens of thousands a year just arriving from a safe country, France, and claiming asylum, and it's costing us billions. You have to stop the flow, and you have to stop it rapidly and completely. And we have a plan to do it by using Ascension Island as a detention centre. No one is going to pay 5,000 euros to go there for 2 years and then get shipped back to where they came from. It's going. That's just the way it works. So, but the government is so stupid, they keep the incentive in place. And the incentive, I've always said, the migrants are making a brilliant deal. Pay 5,000 euros and get you and then your whole family on the British state forever. And the net fiscal cost to that of the state can be 500,000 a person. So it's a great deal. And if you offer that deal, don't be surprised people take it up. But it's those are the areas. I mean, there are plenty of other areas. Policy advisors, the 6,000 more policy advisors since Brexit. It's not clear that policy is better. So there's lots of areas that you have to get real on. Then you've got all the DEI spending, all that goes in our view, all of it. Every single is divisive, it's not helpful, costly, and it's not just the DEI spending, it's the costs it imposes on the organizations that go for it. So there's lots of areas we have to get real. You're quite right. The PSBR will be about 130 billion this year probably, and I'm a little bit more optimistic on the debt costs on the interest payments because we have a lot of index linked debt in Britain, and people are very worried about the 30-year. The long bonds have gone up to 5.5%. But most of the differential between Britain and the other countries, which is 2%, is actually inflation expectations. So if inflation comes down, that will narrow. So your borrowing costs will go down a bit. But that's about the only thing I can be optimistic about, actually.
Yeah, you can. I mean, yes, but a lot of the things you just talked about are inflationary. So housing benefit is inflationary.
Yeah.
More immigrants is inflationary. They're competing as simple as they're competing for housing, which is
Yeah.
inflationary. The growth in welfare spending is inflationary. You're taking more people out of the revenue generating stream, and they become net recipients. So we already have 52% of Britain's at least partially dependent on welfare benefits for their income. This doesn't seem sustainable to me. I mean, what's your comment?
No, it's not sustainable. I mean, just on the data, it's not sustainable. You can't go on like this. We cannot go on like this. And I think it's a cultural problem because the the political class, the ruling class, is partly innumerate, but partly just cowardly, and display all the sort of late stage liberal, late stage, sort of cultural decay aspects. They can't. It's high time preference, short termism, it's instant gratification. It's no one. One of the reasons I support Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain project, and I'm on the advisory council there, and we published something today on immigration and repatriation of illegal immigrants, is that he has strength. I mean, I don't agree with all of his economics, but he has strength. And strength, I'm afraid, is a prerequisite. If we're ever going to get out of this in Britain, the first thing I would look to is in politics and politicians is strength. Do you have the bottle to say this is the solution, this is the truth of the matter, and we need to take some tough decisions? And too many of the existing political class just can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. So we're already talking about the issues of the day. Let me give you an opportunity to declare what you think the greatest issue facing Britain is.
Um, I think it sounds like a cop out because it's so general, but the greatest issue is what I'm talking about is cultural decay. It's a lack of um, firmness and clarity and leadership and bottle in the political class. Because if you lose bottle, you lose everything, this goes across all domains. So they can't plan anything. They don't have the ability to say we're gonna. The nature of investment is forgoing something today for a better tomorrow. And we just can't, the political class can't do that. They cash out all the time. They just bottle it all the time. So you have to have an old-fashioned virtue actually back of toughness and strength. And so let me go into other areas from that, so honesty about waking up to the fact that there's an invasion going on. You can't, how can I have open borders? I mean, a society, you can't, for a start, you can't have a welfare state in the long run. Welfare states are based on sharing, solidarity, and contribution. Those are the three things. So if you just allow people to wander in, who've paid nothing into it at all, people get upset. And there's no good progressives saying, "Oh, it's terrible you're getting upset." It's obvious that people will get upset. Why shouldn't they get upset if people just wander in and take the benefits without contributing anything? Um, you know, Mass immigration, the failure to train people, which is again short-termism. You can't train anyone. It's easy to ship people in. But that's an addiction, and like any addict, Britain's got higher doses. You just need higher doses of mass immigration to plug your labour gaps. Meanwhile, you've got 20% of people on out-of-work benefits. That's about the worst combination you have. So some of these things have to. I'm afraid I wouldn't have said this a year ago, but I think some of these things are going to have to be solved by a crisis of some kind. If it takes shortages in labor supply and vast turnarounds, a shift in the conditions of the labor market to get people off welfare and into particularly the caring professions and so on, social care and things, then you're going to have that, I'm afraid. You're going to have to do this. And so I think the cultural decay is the biggest single cause that we have. But I think on the lighter note, I think the public can see it. And I think there are one or two politicians and people that are stepping up. And I think there's one or two in reform that get it. So,
Yeah.
I think that there will have to be a correction. And I think that also from an optimistic point of view, the day that you start turning it round, it starts getting better. Literally the day that you start getting these things sorted, it gets better. So you can, with the right policies and action, you can. I do think Aris Rusinos is right. I think Starmer. It's the last stand of crazy progressive liberalism. That's what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I might have said that 10 years ago. So, whoa, surely we're at peak woke now, and I was totally wrong. So, yeah, I mean, I'll say something else, William. Your last statement, almost all of that sounded Thatcherite to me. How do you, I mean, things like we should be more culturally ambitious. We should get over this, the malaise that we've acculturated to, we've normalized to.
Hmm.
We need to cut welfare. We need to get people more ambitious economically. We need to get more people into the labor force, stop rewarding them, disincentivizing them for
Hmm.
getting out. I mean, that's all Thatcherite, right? I mean, do you agree with that?
It sounds like it. And actually, I was honoured by the European Conservative to do a long film interview with Charles Moore, who is Thatcher's official biographer. It's the centenary of her birth, so they're consolidating the three volumes into one. In next week, actually, it's going to be published, and the our interview goes out next week on the 13th, I think. Um, and it was a very long interview, and I've never doubted her some of her intentions or her patriotism, actually, but I think she's cursed with um, the wrong economic solutions, which you see, I mean, to be crude, to get the point across very quickly. I think Lord Stockton was right. Basically, they sold the country. They thought the country was some sort of shop. So privatizing water, privatizing, unless you didn't, but it was followed from our policies, privatizing the rail system and opening your industry up for foreign purchase. Too much laissez-faire free tradism just beggared the country. And it obviously on the data uh, deindustrialized it. And from the Midlands to the North, I make the point that it would have been cheaper to keep the factories open because the cost of mopping up the blood to the state and to society. Remember, the foundation of family life was the industrial wage. Was far greater than any benefits they thought they were going to get from free trade economics. So I think she was just wrong about that. I think a lot of selling the family silver is not a sensible thing to do. And also on the data, I think Thatcherism is vastly. I think culturally she says many of the things that I'm saying now of the need for strength and resilience and restoration. I agree with that. But on the data, it failed. Growth, productivity, all of the metrics deteriorated after Thatcherism. And the 60s and 70s actually looks pretty good now when you look at it in retrospect.
Okay, so what else do you think is an issue that we haven't mentioned so far? What we should be concerned about?
Well, the big thing is energy. So the big energy is the master industry. If you don't invest in energy and you end up having what we have now, which is the highest energy prices in the developed world, you would deindustrialize and you'll beggar yourself. And that's what's happened, and it's absolutely tragic. Very briefly, we privatized production. We stopped. I mean, the CEGB, the old energy board, it only had one job, which is to open power stations and distribute, transmit energy, and it did so very successfully. The growth was pretty much straight line, 3% a year, very good. And then you get privatization into an area that it shouldn't be. You end up with a poor old consumer having to negotiate 80 different energy companies flogging you, uh, and gas and electricity, and taking a margin and taking a bet on the wholesale markets. And then you just kill your nuclear industry. I mean, basically, we invented this thing in the 50s in Britain, and they let it decline. And Blair and Brown thought we didn't have enough money to maintain British nuclear fleet and sold it to the French. I mean, that again, I think that's a cultural problem. You don't do that. I mean, like a successful industrial economy doesn't do that. The French wouldn't have done it, and the South Koreans, Japanese would not have done it. The Americans, I don't think, would have done it. So they've destroyed that, and then you get this awful innumerate thing, which is net zero and renewables. And I'm not against decarbonization, fine, but via nuclear and having oil and gas as a route to get there, perfectly sensible to do that. But I'm against renewables because they just don't work. I mean, for a start, you need two systems. I mean, it's so simple. If you have renewables, if you have sun and wind power in Britain, when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, you have to have another system. You have to have a proper system, which is gas-fired power station to put in nuclear. So it's crazy. Why have two?
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. So the government, again, just basically fib about this. And I've debated it enough times to make the crude point that remember that gas and oil is such an efficient and energy dense form of energy that you can tax it. Renewables are so inefficient, they have to subsidize it. That's the difference. I mean, and so I think energy is just a key thing. We're about 40 gigawatts short, maybe 50 gigawatts short of grid stabilization, just to give us a chance of not losing all our energy intensive industries, which we are. But I'm very worried about it, Bruce, because I think it's happening in front of their eyes. And you have someone as Energy Secretary in Miliband who's others have said is not really the full shilling, and he's an ideologue, and he'll see the country just fall apart. And it's a bit like Thomas Kuhn, with the philosophy of science. He'll still believe he's right. He'll still cling on to this dogma that he's right as everything falls around him, and we won't have an economy left. So I think energy abundance is the key thing, and I just it's so fundamental, so fundamental.
Yeah. So we've talked about fiscal collapse and energy collapse. We've alluded to social collapse. So we've talked about, there are ethnic tensions
Mm,
illustrated last week by an Islamist attack on a synagogue, which
mm,
is reminding the public of a wider problem of two-tier justice, which seems to privilege Islamists and discriminate against Jews and Christians,
mm,
including the this week the response to protests in favor of Hamas, even on the day of that terrorism,
mm,
protected by the government, while the government is, accusing Nigel Farage of being a far right racist and cracking down on anti-immigration protests and all the rest of it. So we have
mm,
a two-tier justice. There's this wider problem of two-tier justice, two-tier politics,
mm,
and there's an ethnic dimension to that. So the two-tier has an ethnic, religious
mm,
dimension to it.
mm.
So how concerned are you about social collapse? Like I mentioned, there are people talking about civil war. How concerned are you about it?
Obviously I've listened to the interviews with David Betts, and I've read a lot of his stuff as well. And he is an expert in it, and he puts the probability at 0.16, doesn't he, or perhaps even 20% of it happening. So I don't I but the problem with it is how do you define it? But before I go into that, I think when you say two-tier justice and so on, I think there's just a massive, and this is throughout a lot of Western Europe. Some countries are better than others, but in the Anglosphere particularly, I think there's just a massive, broad problem about Western civilization being what I call disprivileged and disliked and denigrated by the cultural elite and the universities and media and politics, civil service, and the rest of it, and even corporate bodies now. And I think that's just a form of sort of cultural decay. If you start having a pop at your own civilization and you cannot deal with it fairly. I mean, all the stuff, I think I interviewed Nigel Bigger on the colonial stuff, on the British Empire, and people like, there's an academic in the States called Bruce Gilley, isn't there,
Yeah.
who's commented on this stuff. He's very good. the current ruling class in our progressives cannot deal with Western civilization fairly. They cannot deal with it fairly. They can't look at it fairly. It's a point Doug Murray makes. They always think we're uniquely bad at this aspect or that aspect. It's just the facts do not say that, I'm afraid. There's no perfect society, but they have a particular, and I think again, to go back to the cultural thing, it's a sort of, obviously it's an out group preference and an oikophobia, and they just don't like their own culture very much. Now I think if you have that washing over the whole thing, you have a majority population that will become a minority population. White British people will become a minority in the big cities. Many of the big cities are a minority now. I think you're headed for trouble. And the point David Betts makes, is that you're unlikely to have a transition, a demographic transition like that without some serious ethnic conflict. Because to put it bluntly, why should any group be willing to become a disprivileged minority in their own country? They're not really wanting to do it. I mean, logic would say, no matter what you say about diversity of strength or multiculturalism, all the other things, most people wouldn't really want that in the real world. So that's the sort of backdrop to it. I think it's really come to a head recently for lots of reasons. I think interracial violence. I think the grooming gangs issue has finally broken out. I think the Labour Party in particular, but even the police force and the local authorities in the areas were trying to suppress it. I think most of the media class, journalists, apart from Andrew Norfolk, were just too cowardly to report on it. But now it's broken out, and we're aware of the facts. It's odd because the J report is actually quite an old report, over 10 years old now. But on the facts, in a place like Rotherham, which is only a population of 100,000, so there's 50,000 women, maybe a bit more. 1,400 were systematically raped by Pakistani grooming gangs. So that's appalling. And in this country, it probably is. And I always say that you've got to remember that it's racially targeted. This is racial crime because they're targeting these young white girls. It's not without targeting, it's racially targeted. I think it's a racial crime. And I think probably, well, no, it is. It must be the biggest racial crime of its kind in Western Europe post-war. So I think that's filtered out now to the general public, and people, are concerned about it. And there are so many other things, failure to patrol the borders, interracial violence. I think the BLM mania didn't help because it was BLM. The narrative of BLM was uh, it grossly inverted the truth about interracial violence, and that is a problem. So I don't think people feel the political class, governing class, cultural elite has their back. And that's very dangerous. I think that's a broad picture is very dangerous to have a population that's still a majority that feels disprivileged in that way. And all the two-tier justice, just every single week you hear about another case of comparing what someone said on social media with someone actually sexually assaulting someone, or stabbing someone, getting a lighter sentence. So I'm very worried about it. I don't know where it'll go. I don't on the problem with things like civil war. I know David is quite rightly concerned about how it's defined and things, because it's not easy to define. It's not. John Gray has talked for many years, 20, 25 years, about what he described as a low intensity civil war in the United States over resources between groups. I think he's right. Um, I think it's pro I think it's pro I'm hoping there won't be any sort of major outbreak. I don't know. I just don't think we know. I think what a lot of what we're trying to do is actually prevent this stuff. Because, I mean, a lot of us, I mean, my own family's, mixed racially, and I don't, there's no future for us unless you can have a solid one society. I think all these large unassimilated minorities is a form of multiculturalism that can't work. And I think mass immigration doesn't work. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is to give us a chance of a life, common life. But I honestly don't know. I'm very worried about it though, Bruce. I'm worried.
Yeah. So let me check whether you agree with some policy suggestions to solve our ethnic tensions in particular. So people like Douglas Carswell have talked about remigration. He's moved to this position of remigration. The Reform Party has shifted the Overton window to detain and deport anybody who arrives illegally. What's SDP's position on those sorts of policies?
Well, it's in flux because we've just had an election last year, and I think actually there's a vibe shift here, a massive vibe shift that's almost it's difficult to keep up with it actually. But my position is that anyone at all, if the definition of mass deportations is deporting anyone that's here illegally, even if it's 2 million, 2.5 million, yeah, of course, because and I would make no exception because I can't argue if you're going to start arguing that there shouldn't be deportation of people that are here illegally, you're going to have to, well, it's a Kantian position for a start. You're going to have to say, well, that particular law I'm not interested in implementing. You can't, it's just untenable. Sorry, you can't start picking and choosing. Let's not worry about that law. I'll pick and choose. No, if you're here illegally, you have to go. And it's unfair on people like my own family, many of them who obey the rules, and so you have rules, you've got to obey them. So I have no problem with that. I think talk of remigration generally, it depends who you listen to, but there's a lot of young, particularly younger activists in Britain and elsewhere that will just say deport, remigrate to anyone that says something that's a minority. If a minority person says something they don't like, they'll say deport, remigrate. Well, I don't think you can. You can't have a sustainable position where you can just the state can turn up, take someone's passport off them if they're a second or third generation migrant, and you're going to go back to where it's just not tenable. You can't then. And I wrote a piece for the Salisbury Review on this. If that happened, Bruce, you would no longer be in a world where the rule of law is applied. You'd be in a civil war situation. If
Yeah, well,
that,
yeah. Well, let's take the case of Al Shami, right? So you're right. I agree with you that these are illiberal policies. They are illiberal,
Mm,
but sometimes illiberalism is justified by security or emergency
mm,
measures. Let's
mm,
take Jihad al-Shami, who attacked the Manchester synagogue last week. He
mm,
was he had three wives in a country
mm,
where polygamy is illegal.
mm,
He was on bail for rape.
mm,
He had a history of and his father actually of praising jihadi actions, including the October
mm,
7th Hamas invasion of Israel.
mm.
He had legally naturalized, but is there not a case that that sort of profile, naturalized as a child, does not support British values,
Mm.
is acting in a criminal manner, is supporting extremism? Isn't that a case of somebody who could be stripped of British citizenship?
I think if you're a dual national, you should be deported on being convicted. So I don't think. I mean, it's a point. Paul, you talked about what the state can afford. We have about 12,000 foreign nationals in our prisons. Cost, and that's got about 80 or 90,000. So it's a huge proportion. Most of those people should be deported. A lot of countries around the world, as soon as you commit a crime, a serious crime, you're off. Bang, you're deported. So no, I'm totally in favour of that. I think many of the grooming gang felons should have been immediately deported to Pakistan, in my opinion. But what I can't, and this is the point, I can't argue that someone's citizenship can be arbitrarily stripped because you don't like what they say. If they commit a crime and they're a foreign national as well, I think that deportation is perfectly natural to do.
Yeah, well, okay, I'm following you, but is it arbitrary? If you say to somebody, you support the Islamic State, you support Hamas, a proscribed terrorist organization, invading Israel solely to kidnap and rape and murder civilians. If you support that, surely that you've crossed the threshold there that your right to a naturalized citizenship can be revoked.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I've had conversations in debates face to face with people that have argued for this stuff. And I, my response is that who is, for instance, if someone says, if you say you support many, that one of the chronic problems we have in this country, and it's right the way through the West, is that there's been total indifference or blindness about the level of extremism within the Muslim population, and it's just on the numbers. I mean, sorry, the Shawcost report was 40,000 people. The state of following 40,000 people and about 800 people almost daily. It costs about 15 people to follow one person. So this is just a fact. Now the problem that you have legally is that if someone is a British Pakistani or British Bangladeshi or British Iraqi or whatever, and they've got a British passport and they're born here, and they say things that you don't like, does that entitle you to say, right, I'm going to take your passport off you and ship to where your ancestors are from? And that is, you can see, I mean, we don't have to agree just right now, but you can see that is a highly problematic because apart from anything else, in terms of due process, you say something on Twitter that I think is extremist, and it might well be, is that sufficient? And who decides? So these are the things that I raise with people on our side, I think, that are very concerned about it. It's not the young ones in particular, they don't think very carefully about how it could possibly happen. And anyway, Mike Jones, the guy that was at Migration Watch, who's one of the most intelligent commentators on this area, is that I think some of the sort of nationalists are getting, and I'm a nationalist myself, but some of the nationalists are getting ahead of themselves in wanting things that are not even. Why don't you stop importing 1.4 million people gross a year first? Why don't you deal with the 2 million and 2.5 million people that are here illegally first? Why don't you stop this open borders system on the south coast first? And I think that's probably more relevant, actually, to be honest, just to stop it making the situation worse now.
Yeah. William, you are such a fascinating man to talk to because you are a classical liberal, a nationalist, social conservative. What have I missed here?
It's
How would
very.
you describe yourself?
I'm a sort of British Gaullist. I'm a nationalist, and I'm interested in the I-we balance. I appreciate classical liberalism is different to liberalism. I'm not a liberal at all. I'm an anti-progressive, and the political figures that I like are interested in the us, not the we, and not the me. It's the I-we balance for me. I think there's a lot to be said for sharing and togetherness in a state and in a community and in a family. And I think our slogan was developed because these are the places that we share things together, and that's why. And also, I generally win the argument with the people on things like the water and the trains because it's an insult to me to sell these British assets. I can't abide these things being just farmed off, and the indifference is off the scale. But I've never argued for a big state. I just want a strong one. And in Singapore, I like Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Keng Swee just on the record have created the pretty much the best from nothing. It's not from nothing because the social capital is incredible and the location is incredible. But these are my heroes really, which is why it's syncretic and why it's red and blue. I think it works. That's why it works.
Yeah. All right. So, is there any issue or policy we have not discussed which you think you should mention now?
No, I think we've done very well in the hour and a bit. I think we've covered a lot. I think that's basically it for now. We'll have to have a check out in a year's time, see how it's going.
I would love that. Let's make that commitment. All right. Any final message with him?
Just take care, everyone, and be optimistic. And from the moment you solve the things, it gets better.
Yeah, I agree with that. William, thank you so much for your time. It's been a privilege to talk to you again. I hope we do it soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, Bruce. Take care. Cheers.